All right, some of the objectives that we want to do here. Define the political frame in relation to leaders and followers, as we've done all the way through, and then explore its cross-cultural setting or implications for that frame. What drives the power frame for Bowman and Deal is limited good, limited resources, I should say. That there's only so much out there, and therefore there's competition to be able to access those. There's alliances that are built to help you get those, and so therefore there is always tension within any organization because of limited resources that are out there, whether it's human or material or immaterial resources, doesn't matter. So that's where the politics come into play, and that's where the power issues come into play as people vie for those limited resources, and that's what creates conflict. We often think conflict is totally bad, but conflict isn't necessarily always bad. Conflict can be very, very good. It's like pain. Pain can be very good. It tells you something is wrong, right? So it's, in that sense, that's very helpful. So even though we don't like to go through it. But anyway, that's where they're coming from. Limited resources will dictate that we're going to have conflict and tension within an organization because political means will be used to ascertain those two entities, whether material or immaterial. In the political frame then, Bowman and Deal make this quote, they write this one, they say, organizations need benevolent politicians. The Thai would agree with that one too. Thai love structure, but they love the benevolent side for their followership, who steer a course between, watch this one, the naivete and the cynicism. And you have usually a lot of that in any organization, naivete and then cynicism. Beyond the yellow brick road of naivete and the mugger's lane of cynicism, there is a narrow path, poorly lighted, hard to find, and even harder to stay on once found. People who have the skill and the perseverance to take that path serve us in countless ways. We need more of these people, many more. So that's the type of people we're going to do as they go down this, and because cynics, if you don't get the resources after a while, you can become very cynical. And there's naivete that's associated too, that you think, well, we just should get this stuff. So those things, we need people that can know how to use power in a way that will get us past those two and keep us on that little focused, narrow pathway. Some of the assumptions that they say drive the political frame are, one, the most decisions in organizations involve allocation of scarce resources. So if most decisions are doing that, then you can see why we have the tension that we'll have, because most decisions in organizations involve allocation of scarce resources. They will do that. Organizations are coalitions composed of a number of individuals and interest groups. So there's your subcultures within any organization who are gathering together for the idea of how do we get the resources, okay? One of the tensions we've had in our school continually is who gets the next hire? Does it go to undergrad? Does it go to grad? Does it go to a combination of both? You know, and those, how many times do you get to do a new hire? Well, not very often. And so when there's that opportunity, when there is funding, finally you get it, then who gets it? No tension at all there, you know, none at all. Yeah, right, always tension. Individuals and interest groups differ in their values, preferences, beliefs, information, and perceptions of reality. These change slowly. So once again, you get into your mindset as to who should get that hire. And you have that mindset, and it's hard to get out of that to see any compromise, any ability to compromise for even sharing of that professor. Hard to do. Organizational goals and decisions emerge from ongoing process of bargaining, there we go, here's our words, bargaining, negotiation, jockeying for positions among individuals and groups. So a little horse swapping going on here. And that's what has to happen. And that's why it does demand really compromise on both sides of the thing, because you're never going to get everything you want, probably. You know, it's just too limited resources, too many requests, and therefore it's not going to happen. Then, because of these scarce resources and enduring differences, power and conflict are central features of the organizational life. Notice that. They're not just out here in the little periphery, they are central features. You can expect this in any organization, on any size, small, medium, or large, it doesn't matter. These are central features of the life of an organization. Why? Because organizations are alive and screaming. They're never static. They are always moving in one direction or the other, depending on which groups are pushing which direction, right? And then there's pushback from other directions. So they are alive and screaming. The next one, this is an interesting one. No strategy will work without a power base. You have to have people lined up behind you, with you, beside you, in front of you, and everywhere you can get them to get those limited resources. Have to build those coalitions to make it happen. Otherwise, their strategy is going to be in vain. And the next one, which is a little bit different than that old lady felt about Anita Koschel. Every organization process is political. Notice that one. That's a major statement there. Every wheeling, dealing thing that goes on is political, which means people are what? Trying to get those limited resources. And so they're acting in certain ways and doing certain things to do that and get those. Every organizational process is political. That's a pretty strong statement. Pretty strong. And then power relations are never static, and even the powerful have no guarantee of immortality. I think of President Marcos back in the People Power movement, and one of the things that he didn't do immediately, once the People Power movement started and started to resist him and started to fill the streets, he never sent his troops to take over the radio stations. It was just kind of assumed he'll have his voice be able to be spoken all over the nation through the radio stations. Didn't cover them. Pretty soon they fell one by one by one. And the last one standing was the Roman Catholic one. He lost out on that because he assumed he had that power to use those. And shortly after that, he ended up in vacation in Hawaii, where you were the other week. Did you notice him there? He was, oh, of course, he's dead now. But yeah, just down the beach there from the Rainbow Hotel towards Diamond Head. This author, Benison Company here, which is interesting. This is the way we start doing things, and if you mentioned this, Ivan, the same thing. All of a sudden we open up a new lens and we start seeing something that we hadn't seen before. And this is the same thing that happened here to Bennis. He says, I underplayed most forms of power while emphasizing the role of leader as facilitator and stressed, to use McGregor's famous metaphor, an agricultural model of seeding nutrients and climate building. I realized that an organization was as much a political model, that is, allocating scarce resources, as a human relation model. So now he's bringing those two together. He's open, you know, that new lens, he's starting to look at it. And that's when you start to see different things and helping us to be a little broader than our understanding. And once again, these are cultural issues as to some cultures like that want to be They're just power oriented. I mean, that's where they're coming from. They're used to operating like that. And even when you get into some of the executives and institutions like that, that's where they play. These are power games to them, and they are playing in the power arena. And they know how to play in that. They know really good how to play in that. How does culture define power? Yeah, it's how many different cultures do you have, you know? Lots of different variations out there. And back to our toxic leaders. What drives leaders to become toxic? To start to use power now in a very deviant way. Because not everybody was born that way, right? They moved into that and became toxic leaders. The intent to harm others or to enhance the self at the expense of others distinguishes seriously toxic leaders from the careless or unintentional toxic leaders who also cause negative effects. So Blumen there will go into that and provide depth to that. I don't want to go into that, but just to raise the question and make us start to think how power plays into becoming a toxic leader, because it does have it. There's Lord Acton's quote, which we've already had. Somebody mentioned it. I think it was you, Amos. Power corrupts, or maybe it was Seth. Power corrupts in absolute, power corrupts absolutely. Endless power corrupts endlessly. If you want to test a man's character, give him power. It would have nothing to do with females, though, okay, because they can't have any power, sorry. And this was a good one. Powerlessness corrupts.
Sure.
We tend to forget that part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it's not there, people start doing things that, you know, we're going to make it happen one way or the other. That Dornan, Christopher Dornan, felt he was powerless, I think, and it turned him. Most Thai bosses are obsessed with power and never listen to anyone. That's written by Thai, so they can get away with saying that, okay? There are very few Christians who can carry a full cup with a steady hand. No one can be content with moderate power, for the enjoyment of it can never be secure. One must continually strive to protect it by acquiring more and more. So there's something addictive. It's like a drug. You get a little bit of it, that wasn't too bad, you know? What's a little more? We'll make a little power moves to get a little more, you know? And pretty soon we end up on the toxic leadership side. Remember this one? Don't you realize I have the power to release you or to crucify you? Did he have any clue who he was talking to? You know? Then Pilate gave Jesus to them to be crucified. Wow. Let me take you back in the history a little bit and some of the early writers looking at various perspectives. And basically, all the perspectives we have today are coming out of the foundation that was written back then. I'll do the 59 one where there's legitimate power, there's expert power, referent power, reward power, coercive power. So that's basically the little chart I showed you beforehand. But where like I say, what you find today, this is kind of where the roots of where this was all coming from. These guys were writing back in 1959, so you know they were doing it in the mid-50s, discussing it, but by the time then it comes into print. So just to alert you to those. Newer book, and this is called Soft Power. Have you heard of that book? Yeah, Soft Power. And he makes a little division here from the hard to the soft. So where you're using coercion, you're using inducement, either by force or whatever, sanctions, you make them pay, you know, bribes, this type of stuff, to moving it in now to, from moving it from command into co-opting them, helping, having them involved in the agenda setting, getting something that is attractive to them that they feel that they're having a part of this. So bringing that in. So in other words, moving to the soft side, using power but in a soft way. Now, does that say there's no time for the use of hard power?
That's a political question.
That is definitely a political question.
He does a very good TED talk, by the way. You can look it up online very easily. It's free. He does a 9-minute or 13-minute, very good, concise. He's a little older. He talks slowly. He's actually really good little speech on soft power, global soft power.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what Paul did, right, when he, in Acts 13, when he talks at the end of Acts 13, when he says to the people in Iconium, or is it somewhere there, well, if you guys think that this is, too good for you, you can, leave it, but you should accept it. But, he's using that soft power, speaking softly, but carrying that big stick.
Okay, I want to introduce you to Adams too. We're not going to spend a lot of time here, but just to introduce you to a few things that he pulls out. He was writing way back in the 60s, and so he was definitely a socialist, and so evolution is kind of his background for his theories and so forth. But he pulls some good stuff out there, and his definition of power for him is that it's control over the resources and energy desired by others. So what do others want? What you have, okay, then that gives you power over them because you have what they don't have, whatever that happens to be. And control, then he sees control as, this isn't back and forth stuff here. Where power is reciprocal, because you can use power to win stuff or lose stuff, depending on how it works out. And then for him, authority, then that's the legitimate means of using power. He goes on to divide some of the how they use power, whether it's granted, in this case, allocated or delegated. And for him, granting power consists of one actor or operating unit giving the decision-making power to another. Reciprocation is anticipated. Allocated power, that would be granted power, is like when you graduate here, one of the lines the President will use, President Corey will use, is the power that is invested in me from the state of California. I am now granting you this degree. There you go. So you make it. So it's granted power. Allocated power. Allocated power results in making a coordinate, i.e. peer, into a superordinate. Okay, so when you got your teams together, was somebody selected as a leader, or somebody emerged as a leader, or whether you were given them, you allocated that power for them to be over you at for this particular 2 weeks that we're together. That's what we would call allocated power. Delegated power is granted by a superior ordinate to a subordinate. So if I had a TA in this class, I could tell that TA, I want you to do this to the class, and that TA has that authority then to go and do whatever it is, even though he might be or she might be your peer. It doesn't make any difference. I've delegated that authority to them. He goes on to find and get some, from the very formal to the very informal to the fragmented types of operating units. So now he's really boiling it down. What I'll do later on is I will take these into Wildowski's and print them around as he walks through all the way, from slavery and anarchy and equity and then up to hierarchy. I'll place those in there to just show how they're done, to give us a little better grasp of how that can play out. Some other definitions here then. We define power as the ability to change the behavior of others. That's interesting. Or the ability to influence. So there, Suzanne, I'm trying to help you out here using your term there. One of the things that I want to point out here is that for power to be in operation, you have to have at least two people for that to happen. There has to be, you know, this entity, and there is a interaction between the two. And anytime you have two people, just two people alone together, there's always an imbalance of power. And that's interesting when we have a graduate class like this, and then the first time, and if you don't know each other, and I always love watching the Asians do this. And they're always looking around trying to figure out what's the age of the other one, so they know who can talk and who should shut up and listen. You know, and so there's that little thing going on in the classroom. And I remember we had this one class, and this gal, you couldn't tell her age. It was kind of like mid-30s, mid-40s, you know, you couldn't really tell. And she wasn't talking. She wouldn't tell. And so during the whole class, everybody was kind of, you know, just not knowing exactly how to treat her during that experience. But whenever you have people together, you always have an imbalance of power. So everybody's trying to figure out, where are we in this relationship, so I know how to, in Filipino, you know, there's words you use for somebody older than you, and those are automatically put into your talk, you know, so that you respect. Oh, he's a teacher. Yeah, ho, po. You know, use a ho, po, and you stick it in there. You know, it's going to be in there. Or age difference. See, then the older one, you always do that, and don't change that. You know, don't use that word for somebody younger than you or not equal to you in profession, that type of thing. You just don't do that. So there's where you have power exchanges that are always going on. Just look at, I mean, just some of the pictures here. This one here. Notice that power exchange there. These are two, I don't know, it's in Israel somewhere. Well, when somebody's leaning over to your podium like that hand gesture, there's a political move there being made. Or that little one with the little baby and the parent probably there. Or this couple up here where things are not going too well. No one has power without a relationship, and every relationship is imbalanced because it involves power. And that's why there's constant tension all the time. And we're trying to work that out. One way this is expressed, and in many parts of the world, is through the patron-client relationship. Are you familiar with that at all, the patron-client? What is it? Here's one definition of it. And a patron-client is a power exchange, is what's going on here. It's a social relationship between individuals based on a strong element of inequality and difference in power. The basic structure of the relationship is an exchange of different and very unequal resources. A patron has social, economic, and political resources that are needed by a client. In return, a client can give expressions of loyalty and honor that are useful for the patron. So that exchange relationship is very lopsided, but both need each other to really work. One needs loyalty and advertisement, the other needs whatever they need, the material goods or whatever it happens to be from the patron to be able to do that. Kind of the typical procedure, and this of course has some variations of it, but the patron does need clients. And that's why, you know, you can go to these cities where you see this urban sprawl out there, beautiful houses, and right next to it, all the shanty towns, you know, just right there. But there's a relationship going on between some of those people. Because patrons need clients, and guess what? Clients need resources. Where are they going to get them? They go to the patrons to get them. And then, of course, the patron has that ability to select who they want to become a client or who they don't want. And exactly opposite, too. The client will make choices as to which patron they want to introduce themselves to try to get what they feel they can get from this person. So there's a voluntary power exchange when this goes down on both sides. Obligations, bidirectional. They both have requirements on both sides of them. And those are always being renegotiated because these are, they're not lifelong usually. It can be, but it often is not that. Some of them do go into that though. But they are constantly being renegotiated. And that's why some of the gifts are given when you are given something, you're expected to give something back of higher quality of some kind. Well, if you can't match it materially, then there's other ways you can give expression to other people that will raise the status of your patron by just telling people how great he is, how he's helped, getting his reputation known and spread. Those are ways of doing it. And fortunately, the males and females can get into this one, so we're okay, Susanna. Okay, so some of the mutual obligations. What can the patron provide? Protection, access to resources. He can get you into meetings with people. He has all this network out there. Group identity, advancement opportunities, gifts, favors. He can just give you good old advice. Clients, what do they provide? In return, there's the obligation. They're going to give labor. They can work for you. They can help you produce income. They can have a public, that's where you broadcast the fame of your patron, how great this individual is. If in the political realm, you can help get him votes. Go to work for him, right? Back him. Help form alliances that will give him the votes he needs to become a whatever in some kind of political offers. And you can make him aware of when the enemy is out there and what's happening. Bring that information back to him. So that gets into the whole area of reciprocity, giving back and forth. And you have, in most settings, it's very unequal. Almost every setting is very unequal because the client is no way able to repay what that person has received. Can't repay that. There can be negative, you can take advantage of it. And then they also talk about balanced reciprocity. I have a hard time with that one. It's balanced in the sense, if it's balanced in the sense of there's giving back and forth, it's bilateral, I'm fine with that. But it's never going to be balanced in what you give me, I give you, and we can quantify it and it's equal. It's not going to happen. One we're familiar with, I, Paul, write this with my own hands. I will repay it, to say nothing of your owing me, even your own self. There you go. There's a patron client, there's reciprocity, all coming into play here. And those are Paul's making a few power moves here to help Onesimus get back there and get in good standing with his former slave owner. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a great story right here.
Mm-hmm. Go back and read that story from a patron-client perspective, from reciprocity perspective, from a political perspective, and you will see stuff you will not see before.
That's right.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's like the Philemon is about forgiveness. No, it's not about forgiveness. Because I used this in Chiang Mai this time in the honor shame class, and I had a friend go over with me, and he was going to do Philemon, and that was his job, to do Philemon for us over there and looking at honor shame, reciprocity, patron client, the whole thing. And on the airplane ride over, he was sitting there, he had his computer out, he was working on his Philemon stuff. Somebody over here was reading it, you know, and comes up to him afterwards and says, "Hey, I saw you were working on Philemon. I just taught on that for 6 weeks." "Really? What'd you teach about?" "Forgiveness." And he says, "Well, you know, maybe there's more than just, you know, maybe it's not quite forgiveness. Maybe we should look at." So he had opportunity to use his Philemon already before we ever got to Chiang Mai. That's typical because we don't read it through the eyes of how these people would be looking at it. Some of the types of patrons that are out there, there's the gullible ones, there's the gracious ones, there's the greedy ones who will take advantage of these type of situations, what somebody called lopsided friendships. And there's opportunistic ones. Ooh, I can use this, I can get this guy to, you know, so all kinds of different patrons out there, just as there are all kinds of different clients out there. Here's one from David, who is a patron. After he returns with the ark, he gives goods to each person in the crowd. Spreading it out there. Clients, which means actually to lean on, and that's what they're doing. The great thing about a client is if it's a good client, what is he going to do? He's going to be loyal to his patron. Loyalty is key to this. And so when you look at the life of Christ, he's the client, God the Father is the patron, and he goes through that and he is obedient to God the Father, does what he wants. He is a loyal client to the other member of the Trinity. One of the greatest things a client can do is honor his patron in public. Anytime you get public recognition, that is really, what does that do to you? You know, it kind of brings you, wow, interesting. During the last graduation, which was really interesting, and I had no clue this was going down, Dr. Penoyer talks about, he mentioned me and that, and my books and my stuff, and I'd be leaving, but it was a public recognition of my work over 22 years here. That's amazing, you know, when that happens like that. I'm the client, he's the patron, right? But he honored the client in this side and just reversed the roles on that. Clients can also be opportunistic, looking to see what they can get. And they can be very disloyal too. So they can go both sides, just like the patrons are both sides, the clients are both sides. But these are all power exchanges that are going on. And we have to know this because the Bible is full of them, and if you don't read them from that perspective, you're going to miss. And that's why the political frame is so strong, because it's the patron-client thing that's going down in much of Scripture, including the patron God and the client son, all the way through there. Michal was the disloyal client. This is a good one here. And remember, the king comes back, David comes back, right? And he's doing his little dance out there. How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servant maids, as any vulgar fellow might shamelessly uncover himself. Okay, she's talking to a group of people here making that statement. So she's being disloyal. And results of that for her, she remains in David's harem, but now she's isolated, now she's unloved, now she's forgotten. So that she paid a price for being disloyal to her patron. And that's what'll happen. Okay, moving from the patron-client to the broker or the middleman, or in Scripture we call that the mediator, somebody playing that mediator role in there. Another way of power exchange, using somebody to come in the center of things, or even using a person to, Christ being the mediator between God and man, right? And whenever we're talking about patron-client honor-shame societies, then we're going to be talking about not Christ, looking at Christ as a substitute, but looking at Christ as a mediator, somebody in between. And if we can, once again, start to look through Scripture from that lens, then we'll start to see things we haven't seen before as well. Adams, if you work your way through there, here's how he defines structure: that which is always, that which is and always something out of or beyond our control. To illustrate that, do you recognize who that is? The TSA here. Who is that? Work Rumsfeld.
Yeah.
Yeah. And structure is beyond our control, okay? He's the head of what? You know, and the role that he played in the American government, he's still going through TSA here, okay? That's what Adams would say, it's always out of our control. Anyway, he goes into mentalistic and energist. I don't want to go into that, but his point is, and one of the key points that he brings out, that social relationships are based or premised on the control, and he'd only go material, he won't go spiritual, but are only based or premised on control of material resources. So that's where he's coming from. We would add the spiritual on that as well. So as a socialist, he can't quite handle that. He talks about skill authority. An individual has the skill authority because he knows best about something and is regarded as having special capabilities and controls. You know, you want a pilot flying your airplane. You know, you want a computer expert working on your computer. You want a good dentist working on your on your teeth. Legitimacy, that's the cultural potential about an authority, a law, an act, or what you will, to the effect that it conforms to the recognized principle of accepted rules or standards. So we've been going through that. Types of power, again, you have personal power. There's impersonal power, that you can just impose your will upon others. There's tactical power, where you strategize and you think about how we're going to approach this meeting so that we can come out on the winning side. We use structure to do that, and we're going to add, of course, the spiritual side. And that is, it's not a separate category. That spiritual entity is working through all our activities in every frame then. The nature of power. Power then is the ability to produce the desired intended effects in the world. The assurance that one's existence being manifested and made concrete by the efforts one produces. And individual power, this little guy here in China sitting in front of the tanks and being able to stop the whole thing. I've tried to ask people in Asia if they know what happened to this guy, but I've never found any outcome to that. Power, you can be used in a couple of different ways. You know, when it's used wrongly, people can get killed. So as we move into Wildowski and we move into Moses' life there, he used power and some people got killed. That individual got killed there in trying to move his people and move them into safety. When it's used rightly, though, people get helped. And going to Queen Esther here, she was intelligent, she was a strategist, she was a persuasive speaker and a risk taker who spoke up for what she believed in and asked for what she wanted. She studied palace politics to penetrate the inner circle of power. And she listened to her mentors to better understand how to influence others and use her authority to her advantage. Her name is Esther. If you're female, that's a great book to read, that little booklet right there. The Old Testament world and power. The Old Testament data imply that there is indeed more spiritual power available than we are permitted to explore. Schuster's book gets into that whole area for you on that in the Old Testament. And yeah, it is full of power, and we have tended to not see that, at least from the West side. On every page of the New Testament, one finds the terminology of power. In Pauline terminology, the gospel is the power of God. The gospel is inseparable from power. Its efficacy is supremely concrete. The modern reader tends to associate logos and egelion with doctrine and specific content, whereas Paul's interest does not primarily focus on these aspects. By endowing gospel with power, the apostle has assigned it the very quality which is consistent with its oral operation. Paul connects the word of power with the oral word because the real nature of words, their power, is disclosed when they are spoken, pronounced. Now we're into orality and the power of the spoken word, to use to bless, to use to curse. The concept of the gospel as the power of God states nothing less than a fundamental creed of the apostles' oral hermeneutics. So taking it from into the New Testament then and into the gospel specifically as being the power of God. Some implications of power. Many Christians have come to think of spiritual warfare. This is written by somebody you might know, the new dean of Talbot, Clint Arnold. Many Christians have come to think of spiritual warfare as a specialized form of ministry, exorcism, deliverance, ministry, or certain types of intercession. While these may represent one facet of the topic, indeed one manifestation of the battle, spiritual warfare is much broader and all-encompassing. Spiritual warfare is a way of characterizing our common struggles as Christians. Spiritual warfare is all-encompassing. It touches every area of our lives, our families, our relationships, our churches, our neighborhoods, our communities, our places of power. So it is dominant in the Old Testament, it's dominant in the New Testament, and we now need to start looking through Scripture from that lens to see what we can see that we didn't see before. And to me, this is one of the things that when it comes to winning and losing, when it comes to giving up power so somebody else can mature and move into positions that you may have held, and to see them actually do things better than maybe you did them. And this is contrast to limited good, where people feel that there's only so much good that's out there, and if that good's given to somebody else, that means you have less of that. And that's there's a dominant theme around the world in that, from that capacity. But in the spiritual domain, shared power results in multiplied power. You don't lose power when you give away power. You actually multiply power. If we can learn that, then you feel good about seeing somebody do stuff better than what you did, and move into positions that you had formerly been in. Those are, to me, great things. So the point being then, from Schuster will bring this out very strongly, then Scripture operates within the warfare worldview. And back to Boyd's book on the God of War. Okay. I'm going to skip over to here. In the political frame, too, how does forgiveness play into all this? I jumped ahead of there a few slides, but forgiveness is a daring political act that can reorient political conflict. Isn't that powerful? That is a powerful line, man. Forgiveness is a daring, and that's what it is, it's daring, political act that can reorient political conflict. And I think of South Africa when I think of that, you know, and what had to happen there in South Africa to help just start that healing process. but the risk those people took when they started to do that. Okay, so there you are. What does the use of power reveal about Interact Ministry? Who used it? How did they use it?
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.